Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have a lineup of terrifying encounters to share with you. Before we get into those encounters, though, just a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those audiobooks are also in the description as well. Now, I have taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first experience. I spent the beginning of this day at a rundown school basketball court. Everything about it was odd but fun. I was enjoying myself. I was new to the city and my neighbor, and I walked. You know that saying, time flies when you're having fun? That's exactly what it was. Due to my home life, it's easy for me to pick up on the vibe of the area and when it changes. It got dark really quick. The vibe of the basketball court went from fun and happy to, I guess, the right word would be sinister. The air itself was heavy. Neighbor calls my name. I walk over. He's trying to introduce me to some group of guys. But before I get there, I've already peeped out that he is nervous. The guy that's doing all the talking, he's trying to tell me how the area works, and the groups, and how you've got to belong somewhere, and to belong somewhere, you need to prove yourself. He gives us the ultimatum for me and my neighbor to fight. And whoever wins basically has a chance to try out for his group. And no is not an option. I'm nervous, I'm scared, I'm surrounded, I don't know what to do. Anywhere I could run, I'd be cut off. The only thing on my mind that I could think of was I needed help. They walk us to the school at gunpoint the whole time. This MF is in my monologue. We're by some lockers now and cut off with no exit when we all heard this loud growling. A very large, Great Dane-sized dog came out from the dark area of the hallway we were in. There was really no way it could have gotten over there that I could see. At first, these were gangsters, but now they're terrified of this dog. If I thought the air was heavy at first, it felt like gravity was weighing down on me. Everything stunk all of a sudden. I couldn't move. I was just standing there, and it seemed like everyone was now standing behind me. And this dog had come up beside me. I couldn't see it well. My eyes were blurry from the tears. When it jumped, the two guys with guns started shooting. The only thing I could do was fall, get up, and run. I thought I was shot. I'm running through a wooded area. I was afraid to stop because I thought I would die if I did. I made it home. My shirt and pants had blood on it, but it wasn't mine. I stayed in the house for a couple of weeks, hiding, expecting the police to come and question me. I told my dad, but he didn't give a shit. About the third week, that same neighbor and his mother knocked on the door. He came to apologize and told me that it was a setup. His leg, chest, and arm were bandaged. He said it was the dog. The guy that did all the talking died. Both him and the other person with the gun shot each other, and the dog did the rest. The dog caught up with him while he was running through the wooded area. He said he was asking for forgiveness because he couldn't sleep. Every time he tried, he could hear that dog growling. He was afraid to walk outside because he could hear it. Me and him never spoke again after that day, no matter how many classes we had together. I found out later that year the school was abandoned and considered haunted by the locals. I went there regularly to see the dog. It was really the only place that I could get peace from home and the rest of the world. Never got too close to it, but I never felt in danger. Really quick, before we get on to the other encounters, I wanted to share that with you because yesterday I had talked about paranormal canine and cryptid canine, and how a lot of these hellhounds and dogmen are seen at cemeteries, and there are also reports of black dogs just being like an omen, whether it be for good or evil. And I felt like this one story really belonged here, because it's powerful, and it shows that maybe not all of these paranormal canines are evil. Maybe they can sense the good in people. Today's second encounter. About 5 years ago, my friend and I were walking through her neighborhood back to her house. It wasn't late, but it was winter, so it was starting to get dark around 5 or 6 p.m. To get to her house, we had to walk down a huge hill with many, many streets on it. Confusing as all hell if you aren't familiar with the area. Anyway, we walked down the street. We had to turn right to continue on our route. Left was a dead end. As we neared the end of this particular street, a large animal of some sort went hurling from the right, the direction we were going, to the left, the direction of the dead end. We both stopped and stared at each other, and I shit you not, I remember the look of pure horror on her face. It looked like a dog, but it was friggin' huge. Like, I've never seen a dog that big in my entire life. Whatever it was, it ran on all fours, and at an incredibly fast pace. Terrified, we had no choice but to take this route, as it was the only way back to her house. We approached the street with caution, and both went in opposing directions to look for clues as to what the hell had just happened. We searched under the light of the streetlights for about 10 minutes, under cars, down garden pathways, literally everywhere. No people were around, and no one was walking their dog. No one whistled or called for anything. So it wasn't like the owner was waiting at their front door for this creature to go inside. It literally just disappeared into thin air, which was more unbelievable because of how big it was. We ended up scaring ourselves with theories and running the rest of the way back to her house. Today's third encounter. I feel it's just an obligation to say that I also am a skeptic. I've been trying to convince myself I did not see a large, hairy, humanoid thing in the woods all those years ago, but I did. This was somewhere around the mid-2000s. When I was in middle school, I was staying at a friend's house for the night in the backwoods of Michigan. For some privacy, we'll say his name is Jay. Immediately behind Jay's house was a few acres of woods that led to a lake. If you went straight back into the woods from his backyard, there was a path that went straight to the lake, which was intersected at 90 degrees by another path about halfway to the lake. Probably a quarter mile from the backyard to the lake. If you went straight down the path from the backyard, then turned left at the intersection, the path was a downhill grade, followed by a flat portion, followed by an uphill grade, which eventually ran into a 2-lane country road, one of those 55-mile-an-hour ones that goes on for miles, with not so much as 1 or 2 houses per miles. It was late in the afternoon and the sun was just starting to set. We, being middle school boys, were running around the woods all afternoon playing with fake guns and stuff. Good times. Absolutely nothing leading up to this point was strange. No weird, eerie feelings, no odd, unidentifiable sounds, no paranoia or ghost stories prior to playing in the woods. Just 2 bros running around and having a good time outside. Well, we're basically pretending we're army guys. At one point, Jay decided to run off saying something about flanking the enemy. He dashes off to my left. I started creeping through the woods, pretending to shoot down bad guys as I went. I found myself standing at the intersection described earlier. Straight forward was towards the lake. To the left was the path that went down, then back up to the road. I was standing looking diagonally between the two paths when I heard some faint sound slightly off to my right toward the lake. What I saw made my whole body tingle in the worst possible way. About 50 feet, maybe more, maybe less, toward the lake, and just behind a tree, I see this face and shoulder/arm peeking around it. The most terrifying part was that it was probably 2 feet or more higher than you'd expect a human's head to be. Before I could properly observe the face, which was undoubtedly hairy, it snapped back behind the tree as if it realized I could see it. The color of the figure I saw was light gray, like your average cement sidewalk. Because of that, I was unsure of what it was. My first couple thoughts were sheer confusion and fear. Then, in my frozen state, I remembered that Jay was wearing a shirt almost exactly that shade of gray. I tried shouting his name towards the now hidden figure. I called out maybe 2 or 3 times when off about 50 feet, and to my left, down the path leading toward the road, Jay emerges from the thicker trees. This was the complete opposite direction from the figure I had just seen. There's no possible way Jay could have snuck around me in that short of time frame. To further drive the point home, it was fall, and the ground was covered in layers of dry, dead, deciduous leaves. The crunch from these leaves was very distinct, and you could not avoid it. Anyway, Jay had heard me calling out, and from just down the slight decline, he looked up and asked what's going on. I point off into the trees where I had seen the figure and said in a normal voice, "I saw something big over there." As soon as I finished that sentence, I mean that very second, whatever I had seen started stomping off toward the road, parallel to the path that we were on, but probably 50 to 100 feet deeper into the woods. Woods which were too thick to see anything at that distance. For some godforsaken reason, we had tried to run after it. Jay and I were athletic as 6th or 7th graders could be. We played tons of sports and were fast kids. We're hauling ass down the path parallel to this beast as fast as we could sprint, and yet it was absolutely smoking us. The road, if I remember correctly, was a solid 1/4 of a mile from the intersection of the two paths. We had maybe just finished running down the downhill portion when this monster was already on the road, and believe it or not, we could tell where it was from the crunching of the leaves, and you could hear its massive footsteps clear as day, even while running. When we realized it was getting to the road, we also realized a car was coming. I shit you not, as soon as the crunching leaves stopped and the thing stepped out onto the road, the car slammed on its brakes and pounded on the horn. Its tires screeched for a solid 3 to 4 seconds at least. When the car finally stopped, we heard the leaves start crunching on the other side of the road. And then the car slammed on its gas, peeled out again, and took off like a bat out of hell. Keep in mind, we could hear all of this. We didn't see the car, so there's no way we could even track the person down to ask him what they saw. But I wouldn't be surprised if their story was out there on the internet somewhere about the time they almost turned some monster into roadkill. Anyway, we finally made it to the road and crossed the other side. On that side, it was mostly flat woods as far as the eye could see. Nothing but trees, and more trees. No sight nor sound of this beast. We waited for a bit and went back home. Today's 4th part of the upload. I was hunting by myself in this particular morning in some woods I had been many times. I pulled in and parked in a spot facing away from the woods. It was about 5:30 a.m. and pitch black, about a half an hour before daylight. As I was getting my gear together from the back seat of my truck with my back to the woods, I could hear something walking the woodline slowly. I decided to stop and listen and see if I could figure out where it was and what it was. The problem was that when I stopped, it stopped. So I went back to loading my rifle. This happened twice more. I was a little nervous about going into the woods at this point because I didn't know what or where this thing was. But I had my .270 rifle and a .357 revolver on my hip, so I figured I was fine. I walked a few feet into the tree line and looked around, and there was nothing there. So I made the 5-minute slow walk in the pitch black with no flashlight. As I arrived, I found a big tree and leaned my rifle and backpack against it. I popped up my hunting blind. As I bent over to put my first stake in the ground, something sounding as if it was standing directly over the top of me made a snarling growl so deep it almost vibrated me. This growling grew into a high-pitched scream like a woman. My hairs stood on end as I stood up and turned around with my hand on my revolver ready to fire at any sound or movement, but nothing was there. People try and tell me that it was just a dog, coyote, or bear. Problem is, I'm 6'2", even bent over, I'm at least 4 feet, and I'm no small guy. This was standing right over top of me, plus when I stood up I never heard anything move, no leaves, no sticks. There were no big trees close by, except one about 10 feet away. Plus, it was smart enough to watch me, stop when I did, so I couldn't triangulate where it was, then walk around me to come from behind. Someone I know who had a similar story seems to think it's Indian spirits. This happened about 50 miles south of St. Louis in mid-November, and has a lot of Indian history and hieroglyphs all over the area. Listen, don't listen to your friend, because what was tracking you that day was a Dogman, and you are lucky that it did not disembowel you. But you were very cautious and very intelligent at your decision making. Probably having your hand on that .357 and remaining calm was what saved your ass. Today's fifth part of the upload. I will preface this by stating that the information I'm about to share with you is not a creepypasta or any other form of fiction. It is, in fact, my complete and honest recollection of the unexplained experiences I've observed in and around the wooded area behind my childhood home. Other people in my family noted much of the same while growing up there, and our stories match now that we are all decades older. I'm not saying I believe in skinwalkers, Sasquatch, or any other cryptids, as I am a man of science. I cannot ignore the lack of reliable and testable evidence in regards to such creatures actually existing. That being said, something very terrifying and unexplainable lived or lives in the woods behind that house. The first occurrence, my sister and I had just received a tent as a gift from our grandfather. He had smoked enough Marlboro cigarettes and sent in the USPCs to get us a massive Marlboro tent. My mom hated it. We, however, loved it and immediately set it up on the property line behind the house. We intended on spending the night out there, but after about an hour or so, we experienced something neither of us can explain to this day. We saw an indentation drag itself across the tent, and heard it dragging as well. It was like a giant finger, or maybe a log, something of that size. My sister cried out, and I immediately bolted outside, as I was convinced that it was our father playing a prank on us. Upon exiting the tent, I was greeted by nothing. There was nothing there. I searched the area briefly before grabbing my sister and going inside for the evening. About a week later, I ventured out to the tent again, only to realize that it was gone. I ran inside and asked my mother where the tent was, and she replied that she had thrown it away because it had tears in it. Confused, I tried to convince myself that she was lying and had just tossed it out because she was anti-smoking and thought the tent looked trashy. But I fear that she was telling the truth. The second occurrence, one fall morning, about an hour before my alarm for school went off, I was jolted out of bed by what I can only describe as an otherworldly shriek. It came from the woods. It didn't sound human, but it didn't sound animal either. fox, coyote live in those woods, but they don't make those kinds of sounds. It was insanely loud. The third occurrence, one evening my father and I were up late having one of our classic all-night arguments. As we finally wrapped up our fight around 3 in the morning, my father said he wanted to read a verse from the Bible in order to close on a positive note of peace. As he began to read aloud, that same, or at least very similar, otherworldly shriek boomed through the house. It had to be just outside of the kitchen window, but it was so loud that it sounded almost like it was inside the house. We immediately ran around the house trying to find out what the hell had made such a sound. And it even woke up my siblings and mother, who helped in a confused search. After about a half an hour, we all just sort of gave up and went to bed scratching our heads. The fourth occurrence, in my senior year of high school, I got a cat. She was an outside cat, but we would let her into the garage to sleep every night, mostly due to the coyotes and potentially bad weather and whatnot. She would always come home before we shut the garage door because she didn't want to be locked out. One night she didn't show. I didn't think much of it, as cats sometimes go on long hunting, mating, etc. excursions, only to return 2 or 3 days like nothing ever happened. I assumed this was the case. After not seeing her for a week, I went and explored the area behind my house, the fields, and of course woods. I think I found her. I say I think because I honestly cannot tell. It looked like her, but she seemed to be turned inside out. I stared at the remains for about a minute before turning back and going home. To this day, my family, especially myself, would love to know what exactly was in those woods. Today's final encounter. I was about 12 or 13 years old, and my family and I went to my cousin's house in Oregon. He lived in a pretty big house, secluded, on lots of land. It was surrounded by trees, but from the house, about 50 yards, there were no trees. The first floor of my cousin's house was all windows, so you essentially had a 360-degree view of the whole area. Well, during our stay there, my cousin and I decided we would wake up at 3 a.m., go down to his basement, and play video games. His room was on the second floor of the house. 3 a.m. comes around and his alarm wakes us up. He and I get up and begin to go down the stairs and head to the basement. As we get to the first floor, the floor that's all windows, I notice a pair of giant, glowing green eyes outside of one of the windows staring at me. I stood there frozen, as I could feel it staring at me. My cousin saw them as well, and rather than running back upstairs, he went to the basement. I noped it right out of there and went back upstairs where I fell back to sleep. I woke up a few hours later when it was light out and went back downstairs. The eyes were gone at this point. I went down to the basement where my cousin was. He was playing video games. I asked him why he didn't go back upstairs, and he said because he always sees them, and his parents don't believe him, so he just ignores them. To this day, I always think about those eyes. It still creeps me out. A little more background. The moon was not out. It was extremely cold, but there was enough light out to where you could make out shapes and objects in the house. Where the eyes were, there were no bushes or trees, and would have been too high for a mountain lion to be. The only way I think it could have been a mountain lion is if it was standing straight on its back legs. I also checked the area where the eyes were for footprints, or something that would cause that sort of reflection with no luck. My cousin also said the eyes weren't always in the same spot. The eyes were like a glow stick green with no other colors. They did not emit light, meaning there was no green tint inside of the house. They were super bright. It gives me the chills just sharing this. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. And I want to thank everybody for all of the support. It truly means the world to me. And with that, I'm going to bid you farewell and see ya!